If you really want to know what betrayal smells like, wake before dawn, press your nose to the shoulder of the person you love and catch a single molecule that has no business lingering on their skin. That's how my marriage of 10 years detonated, one quiet January morning in Seattle in a converted carriage house that doubles as my indie perfume studio. My name is Evan Cole. I live nose first, bergamot greets me in citrus flashes, vetiver hums like warm smoke, and the synthetic musk isobeta-1,4 whispers secrets in frequencies most people never hear. That molecule was whispering treason. Scarlett, my wife, globe-trotting travel photographer, the woman whose sun-seasoned skin I could identify in a blind lineup, slipped through the studio door barefoot, fresh off an overnight flight from Chile. "Do I smell like airplane peanuts?" she joked, leaning in for a kiss. What I smelled was a glimmering, metallic sweetness floating just above her familiar blend of SPF, camera bag canvas, and Pacific salt. It was isobeta-1,4, rare, expensive, and certainly not stocked in my lab. Only 6 suppliers on the planet carry it, and I know them all by name. None had shipped to the Pacific Northwest in months. Glass droppers trembled between my fingers while bergamot macerate seeped through my sneakers. Instead of confronting her, I did what every professional knows does at the edge of catastrophe. I gathered data. Each morning for the next week, while Scarlett slept off her jet lag, I sampled her skin with a casual kiss on the collarbone. Gas chromatography readouts traced a perfect decay curve from 1.2 micrograms of isobeta-1,4 per square centimeter on day 1 to 0.4 by day 7. Translation: the man who wore that scent had shared a bed with her roughly 11 days earlier. Chile? Not likely. Isobeta-1,4 led me toward the culprit faster than the sharpest private detective. The molecule appears in exactly one cologne called Rogue Stove, sold only to members of the International Culinary Guild, celebrity chefs who like their egos aged in saffron and oak. I opened Lightroom on Scarlett's iMac and swam through thousands of thumbnails, steam, copper pans, men in starch jackets. One face surfaced again and again: Luca Marchetti, the culinary alchemist, with salt and pepper hair, chili pepper tattoos on his forearms, and eyes the color of old port. A brass pin on his collar marked him as a Rogue Stove subscriber. My stomach dropped 2 stories. Rage and professional curiosity fermented into a single idea. I opened a blank formulation file and typed 2 words: Infidel 14. Revenge, like perfume, needs proper maceration. I built a pyramid as cold-blooded as it was elegant: Haitian vetiver for the ground I'd soon stand on alone, charred cedar for promises burned to ash, bitter grapefruit peel because citrus stings before it refreshes, and at the top, a crystalline 3% isobeta-1,4 so faint the wearer would never notice their own doom while everyone else did. While Scarlett prepared for an eco-retreat in Iceland, Instagram later revealed a Finnish chalet with an outdoor sauna and 2 champagne flutes beside Luca. I distilled sorrow into artistry. My mentor, Silvio Alvarez, fronted half the launch money without smelling a drop. One whiff and he muttered, "Vendetta, nice evolution." The rest came from pre-orders after I leaked a single cryptic teaser, a fragrance born from a stranger's molecule on the skin of the one I loved. 700 bottles sold out in 72 hours at $180 apiece. Every payment tightened the noose. The launch would happen during Seattle Food and Wine Week, ground zero for gastromania and livestream drama. I offered Scarlett an exclusive photo contract, dangling credentials she couldn't resist. Betrayal makes overconfidence taste like honey, she accepted without blinking. On the eve of the gala, she lay asleep beside me for what would be the last time as my wife. At 4 a.m., I slipped from bed, washed with unscented soap, and pulled on the leather jacket that still carried a ghost of our Kyoto honeymoon. The slight tremor in my fingers wasn't fear, it was just as vibrating in advance. Today I would release a scent that smelled like truth and gift my wife the same truth, distilled into isobeta-1,4. When the lights went down and the story behind Infidel 14 bloomed in that crowded hall, I would leave the adulteress and my own pain, locked forever inside a smoke-gray bottle with a name that could not be mistaken. I thought the gallows of launch week would leave me no energy for sleuthing, but isobeta-1,4 kept tugging my mind like a scent hound on a short leash. While our graphics team fussed over label embossing and my intern boxed the first batch of Infidel 14 in smoke-gray coffins, I slipped out of the studio and into Seattle's high-end restaurant circuit. Wearing the plainest black tee I owned and carrying a messenger bag full of carefully chosen lies. My cover story was simple: Evan Cole, niche perfumer, scouting local kitchens for botanical waste, spent vanilla pods, scorched citrus rinds, even bruised herbs to upcycle into limited chef collaboration candles. Chefs love two things more than truffle butter: seeing their name on luxury packaging and believing they're saving the planet while doing it. Gremio was my first stop, a Basque fusion hotspot that always smells as though a cedar forest is having an affair with an anchovy tin. I asked to speak with their executive, hoping to catch a whiff of rogue stove on some sous chef's collar. No luck, only the familiar comfort of smoked paprika and sherry vinegar in the air. But every kitchen door I walked through added another note to my internal map, like connecting dots on invisible sheet music, and I was determined to play the entire melody. 2 nights later, I booked a counter seat at Astor and Ash, Luca Marchetti's current stage. He wasn't supposed to be there. Press releases swore he was filming in Vancouver, but fame has a way of bending reality, and my gut said he'd swing through Seattle before the gala. The hostess draped me in a linen apron, called it the immersive chef-stable experience, and sat me close enough to the pass that I could feel the convection heat on my eyelashes. I ordered the tasting menu and pretended to jot flavor notes for a future scent while secretly logging every olfactory fluctuation that drifted my way. Halfway through a scallop crudo infused with smoked spruce, the air changed. A cold, metallic sweetness sliced through saffron steam, subtle but relentless. Ice Beta 14 freshly applied. I didn't need to turn my head to know Luca had entered the line. The molecule announced him like a trumpet blast only my instrument could hear. The sous chef straightened as he glided behind them, murmuring praise in that lilting Veneto accent Scarlett once called music you can taste. He wore a charcoal chef coat rolled to the elbows, tattoos gleaming with olive oil sheen, and on his collar the same tiny brass pin that had made my stomach plunge while I paged through Scarlett's raw files. The dish in front of me, a single grilled ramp folded over uni custard, suddenly reeked of betrayal. But rage is a dull blade unless it's sharpened, so I kept my smile, thanked the server, and drew my notebook closer, jotting sensory nonsense until my pulse slowed. When Luca finally drifted past my seat, I lifted my head just enough to meet his eyes. He didn't recognize me. Why would he? To him, I was another foodie chasing bragging rights. Yet in that half-second of contact, Ice Beta 14 spiked so hard my sinuses tingled, and I knew the molecule was practically screaming my wife's name at me. I paid the check, left an obscene tip, and walked into the drizzle with purpose. The next 72 hours became a blur of stealth. I charmed pantry managers, traded vials of kaffir-lime hydrosol for gossip, and bribed a line cook with a bottle of small-batch mezcal to photograph Luca's locker. There it was, a matte black atomizer labeled only with a stylized RS and a number 26. Limited edition, the guild assigns bottles to chefs like jersey numbers. My phone buzzed minutes later with a security cam still of Luca and Scarlett arriving together at a freight elevator downtown. Timestamp, 1:18 a.m., 3 nights earlier, exactly when Scarlett had texted me a sleepy selfie from Reykjavik. The lie couldn't get louder if it rented a marching band. Evidence, however, is music only the court will hear unless you pipe it through the right speakers. I wanted the world to smell the discord the way I did, which meant tying Luca's signature molecule to my own fragrance in a knot no one could ignore. Back in the studio, I tweaked Infidel's top note again, nudging the ISO Beta 14 concentration from 3 to 3.2%, just enough to ghost Luca's exact sillage without breaching safety regs. Then I drafted a new narrative card composed around a trace of forbidden musk found where trust once lived. Silvio read it, whistled low, and said, "Kid, you're about to weaponize a heartbreak." By the time Scarlett returned, face flushed, stories rehearsed, I had wired every corner of the carriage house with discreet aroma diffusers set to trigger at her usual morning coffee stop. She inhaled and paused, eyes narrowing as a perfect echo of Luca's cologne threaded through the air, now braided with grapefruit bitterness and a funeral curl of vetiver smoke. "Smells familiar," she ventured. I only nodded. Let her feel the déjà vu, let her wonder why the ghost of her lover was suddenly haunting her own kitchen. And so the trail of molecules led full circle, from a single forbidden note on my wife's skin to a carefully bottled reckoning that would soon detonate in a ballroom full of cameras. All I had left to do was light the fuse, and I'd already ground ISO Beta 14 into the match head. The week before the gala felt like trying to hold a lit match inside a paper bag while the wind picked up. Every step I took, each email signed, each shipment confirmed, felt thin and crackling, as though the smallest gust might torch everything. Yet the more volatile it became, the steadier my hands grew. Revenge, I was learning, has a strange centrifuge effect. It spins the fear out of your blood and leaves only a heavy concentrate of focus. By day I managed production hiccups, a mislabeled crate of Haitian vetiver, a customs officer who wanted to confiscate a drum of grain alcohol because he thought it smelled like contraband tequila. By night I stalked Luca's orbit. He'd moved his entourage into the penthouse of the Colonial Hotel, a 40-story slab of champagne glass overlooking Elliott Bay. Through a florist friend I bribed, I learned he ordered 24 midnight black calla lilies for shoot aesthetics. Through the concierge, I slipped a memory-spiked business card. I confirmed that Scarlett had swiped her key into that suite every evening since touching down. Each scrap of intel was another shard for the mosaic I would unveil when cameras were rolling. But information alone wasn't enough. I needed theater. So I visited the ballroom late after the lighting techs left, pacing the parquet with a portable diffuser in my fist. I released microbursts of Infidel 14 and timed how long the plume took to reach the back row. 22 seconds at standard ventilation, 16 if the aircon kicked on. Perfect. A silent countdown no one would notice until the narrative detonated in their noses. Scarlett, meanwhile, behaved like someone waxing a fairy tale version of our marriage for Instagram. She posted nostalgic throwbacks of us sipping sake in Kyoto, us laughing under Tuscan sunflowers cropped carefully, of course, to hide the fact that Luca's likes landed first each time. One evening she pushed open the studio door, cheeks flushed from salty Cascade wind. "You never take breaks anymore," she said, eyeing the rows of bottled vengeance cooling in dim amber light. "I've never seen you work this hard." I smiled and told her success had a scent I planned to bottle. She laughed, kissed my cheek, and for a second I almost smelled the woman I married instead of the stranger she'd become. Almost. The next day Luca announced a pop-up dinner for 40 VIPs, the prelude to an upcoming cross-media experience, according to the glossy invite. He happened to pick a private kitchen just 3 blocks from my studio. Coincidence tastes bland, this was destiny served medium rare. I secured a ticket through a wine importer who owed me a favor and spent the afternoon polishing a tailor-made story about repurposing culinary smoke accords. If Luca wanted spectacle, I would give him front-row seats to his own hubris. The pop-up space was an old cannery retrofitted with state-of-the-art burners and Edison bulbs. Guests floated in designer sneakers, swirling skin-contact Riesling and pretending they understood Luca's dialectical riff on fire as ingredient. I drifted unnoticed until the third course, when a server produced bowls covered by glass cloches. Inside, wisping upward like phantom silk, was a precise duplication of the charred cedar accord I'd built into Infidel's base, only Luca had married it to smoked tomatillo broth and a cube of poached halibut. The aroma hit me with déjà vu whiplash. This man had stolen more than my wife, he'd stolen the very vocabulary of my craft. I slipped outside, pretending to take a call, and let the cold pierce my lungs. Elliott Bay glimmered below, tugboats shifting like chess pieces. For a heartbeat, wrath tried to crowd out discipline. But the centrifuge spun again, clarifying everything into a single imperative: the reveal must be flawless. I texted Silvio, "Increase ISO beta 14 in diffuser cartridges by 0.05%. Trust me." He replied with a thumbs up and a skull emoji, which coming from a 70-year-old Spaniard felt oddly comforting. 2 hours later, as guests licked the last embers of ancho cocoa mousse off gold spoons, Luca raised a flute to toast the brave hearts who chase flavor's final frontier. Scarlett stood at his side, camera aloft, capturing his good angle the way only an accomplice knows how. I watched them through the window, a silhouette duet framed in tungsten light, and filed the image away for the inevitable slide decks divorce lawyers adore. Let them pose, soon everyone in that frame would smell the truth blooming like sulfur in spring rain. Back at the studio, I loaded the modified cartridges into compact diffusers disguised as uplights, the kind rental companies scatter around ballroom perimeters. Each device now carried enough ISO beta 14 to haunt a small nation but still test safely below IFRA limits. I programmed a synchronized release tied to a single DMX command. One tap during my keynote and the room would inhale the same forbidden musk that started this cascade, only now it would be braided with grapefruit rind and the faint funeral curl of vetiver smoke, Infidel's unmistakable calling card. The night before the gala, Scarlett slept soundly, probably dreaming of camera angles and standing ovations. I lay awake, listening to the rain hammer cedar shingles, and rehearsed my opening line until it flowed like myrrh. Every scent is a confession, but some confessions wear better than rings. At 3:17 a.m., I rose, slid the finished keynote onto a branded flash drive, and sealed it inside the breast pocket of my jacket, the same jacket that once held boarding passes to places we promised we'd explore together. Promises, I reminded myself, are just contracts scented in hope, break the seal, and they evaporate. Morning finally arrived, gray as a faded bruise. While Scarlett curled her hair in the bathroom, I brewed her favorite pour-over, lacing the air with cinnamon and plausible devotion. She sipped, pronounced it perfect, and headed out to secure early access for golden hour shots. I hugged her goodbye, letting my palm rest a fraction longer on her shoulder where ISO Beta 14 still whispered secrets too faint for her own nose. "Break a leg," I said. She winked and left, camera bag thumping against the doorframe, a tiny metronome ticking down the seconds to her reckoning. With the house empty, I allowed myself one unfiltered breath. It smelled like bergamot, vetiver, and the clean, electric hush that follows thunder. Tonight the molecule that betrayed me would betray its maker. And when the last diffuser hissed itself dry, the only thing left in the room harsher than the truth would be the applause. The gala afternoon arrived bright and brittle as though the sky itself had been polished for the show. I arrived 3 hours early wearing the uniform of backstage nobodies, a black crewneck, cargo pants, and a lanyard that read technical vendor. The security guard glanced at the laminate, then at my dead-on stare, and waved me through with the kind of shrug reserved for men who look like they know which cable not to unplug. Perfect. The ballroom still echoed, riggers clanking truss, caterers swearing in Spanish, someone testing the wireless lav mics with aboard check 1 2. My diffusers were already in place, 6 of them disguised as amber uplights hugging the walls like decorative sentinels. I walked the perimeter, air-kissing each one with a thumb twitch on my phone to confirm signal integrity. All green, all humming silent menace. Next I inspected the projection desk where my keynote would live. The AV kid was maybe 22, hair in a top knot and a face full of sleepy optimism. I fed him the final deck on a branded thumb drive and watched as he dragged the file onto the show playlist between a sponsor reel and Lucas sizzle tape. "You sure you don't want a preview?" he asked. "I built it on the plane," I lied. "Works fine." The lie sailed right through his force field of caffeine and self-belief. He nodded and offered me a powdered donut. I declined. Victory tastes better on an empty palate. Scarlett swept in an hour later dressed in charcoal silk and professional obliviousness. She darted around snapping close-ups of flower arrangements, never once noticing that the lilies on every table were midnight black collis, Luca's favorite, ordered under a shell company I created just for that invoice. Conditioning, I'd learned, is the truest leash. Give the guilty small, familiar comforts, and they'll walk willingly into any cage. I watched her frame shots, her finger feathering the shutter, ISO set to 800. Interesting symmetry, the very acronym of the molecule she'd brought home. A production runner hurried over to ask if I was the aroma engineer. I nodded and followed her to a service corridor where Luca paced, phone pressed to his ear. Even in mid-conversation he smelled like a cold chrome blade dipped in vanilla smoke. I hung back, letting ISO Beta 14 bloom around us like television static. He ended the call, turned, and extended a hand. "Chef Luca," he said in the tone of a man rehearsed in being recognized. "Evan Cole," I answered, squeezing just a fraction too hard. "Pleasure to provide tonight's olfactory ambience." "Olfactory ambience?" he echoed, pleased with the phrase. "Make it subtle, I don't want to distract from the dishes." "Chef," I said, "subtle is my specialty." He thanked me, oblivious to the fact that we were speaking in double-edged italics. When he strode away, I caught the faintest shimmer of camera flash, Scarlett documenting her lover's pre-show swagger. For a moment, an old sadness stirred, but the centrifuge kicked in and spun it clean. What remained was resolve. Sound check began. I positioned myself backstage near the dimmer board, phone in hand, diffusers armed. From there, I could see Luca rehearsing his entrance downstage left, and Scarlett adjusting white balance for the 100th time. The ballroom doors opened to the public at 6 sharp. A flood of press badges, influencers in borrowed couture, investors smelling faintly of new leather wallets. They mingled under amber uplights that waited like coiled vipers. Every 15 minutes I triggered a micropuff of Infidel 14, not enough to register, only enough to prime the limbic pump. People kept leaning toward one another, noses twitching, asking, "Do you catch smoke?" Grapefruit. Seating anticipation is half the battle. The rest is timing the strike. At 7:41, Silvio texted house full. Mirrors polished. Godspeed. I slipped on my presentation jacket, charcoal wool, slim cut, inner pocket heavy with nothing but the story I was about to tell. The MC took the stage, teeth dazzling, voice lacquered with sponsorship money, and introduced me as artisanal scent visionary Evan Cole. Applause scattered like loose coins on marble. I stepped under the lights, stared into the crowd, and felt the hush that precedes confession. Behind them, uplights glowed. Above them, chandeliers glittered. Within them, ISO Beta 14 stirred like a sleeper about to remember a nightmare. I cleared my throat, pressed the slide clicker, and began, "Every scent is a confession." The words poured smooth, rehearsed, inevitable. I saw Scarlett lower her camera, confusion knitting at the edges of her composure. Luca folded his arms, the universal chef posture of skeptical appraisal. Nobody yet knew they were standing in the center of a slow-motion chemical revelation. As I cued slide 3, a macro shot of a single musk molecule, my thumb hovered over the diffuser trigger. One more beat. Let the room inhale expectation. Let Scarlett feel the walls inch closer. And when the moment was ripe, when every eye reflected my projected molecule like a hall of mirrors, I pressed send. A soft hiss bloomed against the applause. Beta 1,4, grapefruit, vetiver. My trinity of truth rolled through the ballroom in a silent wave. Heads tilted, nostrils flared. The guilty recognized it first, because guilt, I'd discovered, has its own sense of smell. It started as a ripple, just a set of puzzled glances traded over crystal flutes. But within seconds the ripple became a tide. People straightened, inhaling again, chasing the phantom that had brushed their senses. Grapefruit's tart shimmer surfaced first, bright enough to slice through the room's clamor. Then the cedar-charred undertow arrived, smoky and solemn. Finally, the forbidden Beta 1,4 unfurled its metallic sweetness like a secret handshake for every nerve ending. The entire ballroom seemed to breathe in unison, and in that single inhalation my trap sprang shut. "Recognition," I announced, voice steady through the lav mic, "is the moment a scent turns from anonymous to unforgettable. When that happens without consent, we call it intrusion." Slide 4 appeared. A high-resolution GCMS readout annotated with Scarlett's initials and a timestamp. Murmurs scattered like dry leaves across marble. At stage right, I caught the slow horror dawning in Scarlett's eyes. She recognized the graphic, the date, the quiet dawn when I'd first smelled betrayal on her skin. Luca's posture shifted next. Arms unfolded, chin lifted, eyes narrowing as if trying to glare the molecules into retreat. But there is no glare strong enough to overwrite chemistry. Even from the stage I could see a thin sheen break across his forehead. A telltale sympathetic flash of sweat when the limbic system screams danger. The scent he believed to be his discreet trademark was now echoing off every red velvet drape in the hall, amplified, reframed, and rebranded as the villain of my narrative. I clicked again. Slide 5. A photograph of Luca's matte black atomizer labeled RS-26. Shot inside his locker 2 nights earlier. Someone gasped. Camera shutters clacked. The AV kid backstage cranked the rear projectors to full brightness, turning that atomizer into a looming monument. "Limited edition Rogue Stove, bottle 26, I said. "Retail value $4,000. Or," I paused for effect, "the exact cost of one casually broken marriage." A low hum of shock rolled through the audience. Investors' brows nodded. Influencers lifted phones, hungry for livestream gold. I could feel Beta 1,4 coding their curiosity, fixing the story to memory the way it had fixed Scarlett's lie to my mornings. Time to light the final fuse. "There is, of course, a signature wearer of bottle 26, I continued, pacing downstage until the footlights glowed on my jacket's lapels. "He stands among us tonight, celebrated for turning smoke and salt into something we pay to worship." Gasps turned directional, heads swiveling toward Luca like iron filings chasing a magnet. He tried a smile, but it came out as a glitch, a chef's grin curdled in half-baked bravado. Scarlett, to her credit, kept shooting. I saw her raise the camera, zoom tight on Luca's face, then on mine. Professional reflex overrode panic, at least for the moment. Yet her hands shook, the lens hunted focus. Betrayal may live in skin chemistry, but exposure lives in images, and she knew every frame she captured now belonged not to her portfolio but to the court of public delirium. "Let me share," I said, thumb hovering over the clicker, "how this molecule wrote the recipe for tonight's fragrance." Slide 6, the formula sheet for Infidel 14, my base, heart, top, each stage tagged with Luca's Rogue Musk. The room exhaled in collective realization. Not only had I exposed an affair, I had synthesized it, bottled it, and invited every guest to inhale the evidence. It was revenge rendered aromatic and therefore unforgettable. Luca moved first. He stepped forward, voice pitched low but urgent. This is libelous. You hijacked my scent branding. I met his gaze, calm. Chef, I hijacked nothing. I followed the note you left on my wife. Gasps again, so many that air conditioning kicked in to compensate, pushing yet more perfumed truth across velvet gowns and tailored tuxedos. Scarlett finally broke her silence. Evan, stop. We can discuss this privately. She reached for the mic clip to my lapel, but I sidestepped. Privately, I said, letting the word drip like overaged balsamic, was forfeited the morning your skin borrowed someone else's signature. I gestured to the screen behind us, Scarlett's own Lightroom thumbnail of her and Luca, shoulder to tattooed shoulder, Reykjavik timestamp replaced by Seattle's. The audience didn't need subtitles. Phones rose higher, notifications chimed. A food culture streamer yelled, "We're live to 200,000. The MC hovered, unsure whether to cut my feed or ride the ratings spike. In the confusion, the diffusers finished their final pulses. ISO beta 1 for now lingered in saturation, impossible to ignore, a metallic halo around every conversation. Luca's PR handler appeared, whispering frantic strategies, but the chef shook him off and marched toward the exit. Even the retreat became content, paparazzi flashbulbs strobed the doors as they swung. Scarlett hesitated, camera sagging, then turned to follow him. The ballroom lights caught tears beginning to smear her mascara, each droplet glistening like a rogue molecule finding daylight. I faced the crowd once more. Ladies and gentlemen, fragrance houses name their releases after places, feelings, fantasies. This one is named after a single fact, infidel. Because some notes refused to stay faithful. Applause erupted, hesitant at first, then thunderous, a standing ovation fueled by equal parts scandal and showmanship. Investors found me with gleaming eyes, journalists thrust recorders toward my mouth. In the balcony, Silvio raised a glass, mouthing salute, the silent toast of a man who had seen art and vendetta dance before. Only after the lights dimmed for Luca's hastily cancelled cooking demo did I step off stage and finally let the adrenaline land. My hands, forever steady in the lab, shook just once before I pocketed the clicker. I looked across the ballroom. Empty glasses, swirling camera rigs, the residual shimmer of ISO beta 1 for mingling with stale champagne. The scent of victory, it turned out, was not sweet. It was bitter grapefruit, cedar smoke, and a synthetic whisper of endings. Outside, sirens wailed, probably reporters chasing Luca's getaway car, but inside I felt the first quiet breath of a new life expanding in my chest. I had turned betrayal into perfume, hurt into narrative, ISO beta 1.4 into infidel 14. And in doing so I discovered the sharpest truth of all: justice, when distilled properly, smells nothing like revenge. It smells like closure. The morning after the gala smelled like scorched headlines and oversteeped coffee. I woke alone, checked my phone, and found notifications stacked higher than the Space Needle, industry blogs dissecting the olfactory guillotine, gossip sites looping Scarlett's tear-streaked exit, stockists begging for a second run of Infidel 14. Even the Financial Times wanted a comment. Apparently revenge fragrances spike quarterly projections more predictably than pumpkin spice season. I brewed a pour-over and watched steam halo the kitchen lamp, wondering whether Scarlett had slept at all. Her location tag still pinged the Colonial Hotel, same penthouse that had once billed black calla lilies to Luca's expense account. I pictured the two of them in damage control limbo, Luca drafting mea culpa tweets with a publicist, Scarlett prying memory cards from her camera like shrapnel that might detonate twice if mishandled. A small, clinical part of me felt pity. The centrifuge spun it down to nothing before it reached my chest. Emails first, emotions later. Silvio wrote, servers crashed at 3:14. Restarted. Tripled capacity. Call me when you wake. An e-commerce analyst predicted we could clear 7 figures by Friday if we leaned into the scandal. Stranger still, 2 luxury conglomerates requested acquisition talks. Yesterday they wouldn't have returned my calls. Betrayal, it turns out, is the fastest accelerator in retail. Around 11, a courier arrived with a thick envelope from an attorney's office I didn't recognize. Inside, a cease and desist letter on Luca's letterhead accusing me of defamation, brand dilution, and unauthorized olfactory sampling. I laughed so hard I nearly upset the coffee. He wanted to police how air molecules behaved once they left his collar. That's like suing gravity for revealing which way is down. Still, paper wars require paper shields. I forwarded the letter to my own lawyer, Marianne Faisal, along with GCMS screenshots, security cam stills, and the NDA Scarlett had signed for Luca's show. Marianne replied in minutes, let him file. Discovery will be televised. I'd hired her once to draft a fragrance licensing agreement. I never imagined she'd relish a public knife fight, but betrayal rearranges everyone's priorities, including legal counsel. By lunch, a new kind of message filled my inbox, strangers thanking me. A barista in Chicago wrote, "Your story helped me confront my fiancé." A software engineer from Berlin ordered the perfume, want to remember never to ignore small inconsistencies again. I hadn't set out to be anyone's catharsis, but if the scent of my wreckage served as lighthouse for other lost ships, I wouldn't dim it. That afternoon, I visited the studio, half expecting paparazzi in the alley. Instead, I found my intern, Naomi, seated among empty shipping boxes, eyes shining. 3 more wholesalers, she said, voice trembling between excitement and exhaustion. And Vogue wants an interview, they're sending a writer tonight. I told her to clear 30 minutes, then send her home to sleep. Loyalty deserved rest, not burnout. With the studio quiet, I walked the aisles of cooling racks where bottle after bottle of Infidel 14 waited like glass storm clouds. I pulled one at random, uncrimped the cap, and let the spray settle on my wrist. Grapefruit sliced, vetiver smoldered, Isobeta 14 whispered. Except now I could smell something else beneath, the faint mineral note of closure, a scent no lab could isolate yet unmistakable once you knew it. I'd caged my pain inside 80-proof ethanol and it was finally paying rent. Toward dusk, Marian called. "Luca's counsel just proposed a private settlement," she said. "Low 6 figures if you retract everything publicly." I pictured Luca pacing a sweet strewn with wilted lilies, phone pressed to an ear still ringing with ovations that weren't for him. "Tell them my price is his Rogue Stove license," I said. "Bottle 26 becomes mine or the truth stays live-streamed forever." Marian chuckled. "Vindictive but negotiable. I'll craft the demand." Night spread over Ballard like indigo ink. I poured a splash of peat whiskey, the kind Scarlett hated, and stepped onto the porch. Somewhere downtown, Luca's empire was hemorrhaging PR points. Somewhere else, Scarlett was learning that shutter speeds can't outrun scent trails. Above me the wind shifted, carrying the briny breath of Puget Sound. For the first time in months, I inhaled without searching for betrayal. Tomorrow I'd file divorce papers, meet with Vogue, and approve a second production run. Tonight I allowed myself a smaller, quieter victory, the knowledge that a single rogue molecule had rewritten my life and I had turned it into narrative, art, and profit without sacrificing my integrity to the same fire that burned my marriage. Justice, after all, smells best when aged exactly 1 day past heartbreak. By sunrise on day 3 the scandal had migrated from lifestyle pages to the business desk, and that was my signal to lawyer up for real. Marian assembled a war room in her Capitol Hill office, whiteboard grids, evidence binders, the Rogue Stove bottle she'd subpoenaed before Luca could misplace it. She greeted me with espresso and a grin sharp enough to deb one a salmon. "Congratulations," she said, tapping a headline, "Chef's brand down 37% after scent scandal. We are officially dealing with a distressed asset." I spent the morning signing affidavits, each page an echo of that first whiff of betrayal. When Marian slid the divorce packet across the table, I paused. Not from grief, I decanted most of that into Infidel, but from a strange relief, the kind you feel unbuckling a too-tight belt. I inked my name 7 times, handed the pen back, and felt the papers thud shut like a vault sealing off old currency. Scarlett texted at noon. "Need to talk." "Neutral ground?" I suggested the public atrium of the Fry Museum, lots of echo, nowhere to hide. She arrived looking 10 years older, camera forgotten, phone gripped like a flotation device. We sat beneath a Calder mobile that spun without breeze. She started with an apology rehearsed enough to taste rehearsed, then segued into damage control. Luca had gone silent, sponsors were suspending contracts, her agency feared reputation contagion. She wanted, she said, a narrative course correct. The phrase landed like vinegar on milk. "Scarlett," I replied, voice low, "I'm not your crisis PR consultant. I'm the guy who caught Isobeta 14 on your skin." Her shoulders folded. For a moment the old intimacy flickered, 2 freelancers swapping jet-lag tips at 3 a.m., then collapsed under its own weight. I passed her an envelope, my proposed settlement. She keeps her equipment, relinquishes claim to the house and my company, signs a mutual NDA that still lets me market the perfume. She scanned the numbers, eyes widening at the generosity. "Why give me the cameras?" she whispered. "Because," I said, standing, "betrayal was shot on them. Seems fair you keep the negatives." Outside, rain stitched the sidewalks. I walked back to the studio feeling lighter than aerogel. Naomi met me at the door waving a tablet. Infidel 14 restock, waitlist 18,742. Our server had queued shoppers in a virtual lobby like sneaker heads chasing a limited drop. We crunched margins, reordered glass flacons, and hired 2 temp staffers for fulfillment. Somewhere between print run approvals and pallet tape I realized my company had outgrown the carriage house. Growth and rot, I thought, share a smell of expansion. The trick is knowing which side of the fungus you're on. That night Marianne called again. Chef's team folded, she said. They'll transfer the Rogue Stove trademark plus a 7-figure settlement if you agree not to testify about food safety violations you allegedly overheard. I hadn't overheard a thing, but Luca clearly feared what else I might bottle. I accepted on one condition: bottle 26 stays in my personal archive, never to be sold. Luca agreed within the hour. Transactional justice, brisk, antiseptic, oddly satisfying. With litigation defused and production humming, the house felt claustrophobic in a new way, not haunted, just too small for a future no longer shadowed by someone else's suitcase. I spent a weekend in Portland consulting for a startup that turned spent hops into fragrance bases, fell for the rain-fogged streets and the way the Willamette smelled like wet slate. On Monday, I signed a 6-month sublet overlooking the river. Naomi cheered, Silvio sent a crate of Rioja, Marian emailed, new state, same statutes, update your mailing address. The last thing left in Seattle was the studio itself. I boxed reference oils, swabbed benches, and peeled the nameplate off the door. In the empty space hovered a final ghost of Ice Beta 1-4, faint but present, a reminder that molecules outlive moments. I closed my eyes, inhaled once more, and tasted nothing but grapefruit, cedar, and freedom, my freedom, finally unbound from someone else's volatile compound. I locked the carriage house behind me and didn't look back. Portland greeted me with rain so fine it felt like static on the skin, a city perpetually airbrushed by water. I moved into the riverfront loft on a Tuesday, and by Friday the whole space smelled of fresh pine planks, bubble wrap adhesive, and the faint diesel of delivery vans pulling up with crates of glass. I christened the new lab Studio Horizon because the view stretched wide enough to make the past feel like yesterday's weather. Still real, already gone. The first week was paperwork. Oregon seller's permit, new LLC for Horizon, dissolution docs for the Washington entity I'd hand-built with Scarlett back when every invoice carried both our signatures. The divorce finalized without a courtroom word, her attorneys notarized the settlement, wire transferred my equity in the house, and scheduled a courier to collect the last of her personal items. She took the Iceland photos, the Kyoto sake cups, even the chipped French press we'd argued over in our second apartment. I felt nothing watching it leave, just a quiet click of inventory subtracting itself from my life. While Scarlett's possessions packed, her career unpacked online. A blogger leaked the NDA passages that proved she'd shot promotional stills for Luca under strict confidentiality. Agencies called it a conflict of interest, sponsors called it deception, comment sections called it karma. In a single quarter, she lost 3 magazine retainers and saw her follower count drop faster than Luca's stock price. A PR firm offered crisis rehabilitation, but the internet decided some aromas are too pungent to launder. Luca, meanwhile, vanished into what Gourmet Insider dubbed self-exile with truffle garnish. The settlement funds hit my account on the same day Rogue Stove's website quietly redirected to a 404. I archived bottle 26 in a climate-controlled safe, both trophy and warning label, and filed trademark transfers that let me fold the Rogue Stove name into Horizon's portfolio. I had no intention of relaunching it. Some ghosts deserve glass coffins. With litigation ash swept aside, accolades poured in. For Grandica crowned Infidel 14, most influential niche release of the year, citing its audacious narrative structure. Esquire wanted an op-ed on the ethics of olfactory evidence. Even a tech conference invited me to keynote on scent as data, which I accepted because the honorarium smelled like fresh seed capital. Each mention edged sales higher, but numbers alone weren't the victory. It was the realization that truth, bottled honestly, could outsell any lie. Studio Horizon's first production cycle sold out before the stills finished cooling. Naomi, remote from Seattle until finals ended, handled e-commerce like a chess grandmaster, staggering drops to keep reseller bots at bay. Silvio visited for a weekend, sniffed the Willamette breeze, and declared it wet concrete with a dash of optimism. He toasted my new beginnings with Rioja and left behind a limited barrel of Spanish Oak Absolute as a housewarming gift. When I asked what I owed, he laughed. Just promise your next perfume isn't another vendetta. The market can only handle so much blood in the water. But vendetta had already burned itself clean. In Portland's sunlight, I felt a different hunger, the urge to create something untangled from pain. So I spent late nights drafting accords built on nostalgia rather than nerve endings. Sweet rain on asphalt, bookstore paper, the green hush inside an empty greenhouse. So Beta 14 stayed locked away. Closure, once distilled, had no place in forward-facing formulas. One quiet evening, while the city's streetcar bells chimed like distant wind chimes, I opened my inbox to find a message from the barista in Chicago. She'd worn infidel while ending her engagement and wanted to send a gift as thanks. A field recording of Lake Michigan waves at dawn. I streamed the audio, closed my eyes, and let the water fold into memory. That sound, I realized, was what forgiveness might smell like if you could atomize it: cold, rhythmic, cleansing. I added a new line to the formulation journal. Project Meridian, top note. Lake spray accord, heart, birch leaf infusion. Base, quiet courage. No musk, no cedar funeral pyres. Just the promise of distance traveled and the faint mineral scent of horizons yet to cross. And somewhere between jotting that note and turning off the lab lights, I caught myself humming. An old habit from the early days, before betrayal rewired my breath. The melody felt unfamiliar at first, but then I recognized it. The sound my life makes when there's nothing left to burn except possibility. Rain kept the loft windows glossed in silver. The morning Project Meridian left the pilot still. I'd slept on a futon between crates of empty flacons, notebook on my chest, the scent of birch leaf macerating lightly in an Erlenmeyer flask on the coffee table. Portland's streetcars hummed outside like far-off cellos. Somewhere downriver a barge horn blew. When the city sounds wove themselves into that Lake Michigan recording the Chicago barista had sent, I realized my life had found a new metronome, one that ticked forward instead of back. Studio Horizon was rapidly outgrowing its name. Every sunrise brought a fresh email from some seed fund founder or sustainability startup asking if I could turn atmospheric data into fragrance or upcycle brewery effluent into a limited edition cologne. I said yes more often than no, but only when the request smelled of genuine curiosity rather than hype. Money, I'd learned, has a smell: hot, metallic, faintly oily. Curiosity, by contrast, smells like cedar shavings and fresh ink. I followed the cedar every time. One of those cedar-scented emails came from a tiny botanical ink studio called Evermark, run by a printmaker named Riley Hart. She wanted a signature aroma for limited letterpress runs. Something that feels like the moment wet ink first kisses cotton rag paper. Her brief made me stop mid-scroll. It read more like a diary entry than a vendor inquiry. I invited her to the Loft Lab the following Tuesday without overthinking why her words felt like a door propped open in late spring. Riley arrived wearing a thrifted raincoat spattered with faint cyan blotches. Collateral from her presses, she joked. She stepped inside, inhaled Meridian's proto-batch diffusing in the corner, and closed her eyes. "Smells like first pages," she whispered. We spent 2 hours swapping scent memories. The sweetness of hot metal type, the crushed green tang of marigold stems, a printer uses to test hue density. She never once asked about the scandal. She already knew, of course, anyone with Wi-Fi did, but she treated it like a chapter I'd written, not a brand I had to wear forever. Respect smelled different coming from her. No ISO beta 14 undertone of hidden motive. No citrus flash of performative empathy. Just quiet courage. Exactly what I was trying to bottle. Our collaboration unfolded like time-lapse film. I lent her a Cedaran ink accord for a line of limited prints. She traded me a custom logo type for Meridian's future packaging, handset in vintage lead type. Between ink pulls we shared faux on rainy evenings, arguing whether cilantro smelled soapy, she swore it didn't, and which Tom Waits album had the best late-night bass line. Some nights she lingered after the presses cooled, helping me rack bottles, the birch leaf infusion tinting her palms pale green. Trust grows like moss in Portland, slow, soft, unstoppable once it finds brick. While Riley and I mixed ink and scent, Naomi orchestrated the supply chain from Seattle, firing Slack pings at every hour. Craft shippers arrived 2K short, glass vendor pushing lead-free crystal option, retailer asking for 90-day exclusive. Thoughts? Her competence underlined an emerging truth. Horizon was no longer a one-man cannon aimed at betrayal. It was a studio with staff, margins, and a waiting list larger than some suburban school districts. I drafted employee agreements that included mental health days and aroma fatigue breaks, little safeguards I wished I'd written for my marriage. October crept in, crisp and apple-skinned. Meridian finally crystallized, top notes of lake spray and kaffir lime zest, a heart of birch leaf and damask rose, base of ambrette seed and driftwood, the last adding a salt-polished resilience even isobeta 1,4 couldn't fake. On launch night we skipped the galas and live streams. Instead, 25 friends and early supporters gathered in Riley's print shop, walls draped with drying broadsides inked in seafoam green. We poured samples into recycled glass vials, each tagged with coordinates rather than a lot number, the latitude where Lake Michigan kisses Montrose Harbor at sunrise. No diffusers hissed, no hidden microphones waited. I told the room a simple story. That scent can mark where we've been, but it can also point to where we're willing to go. People dabbed Meridian on wrists, collars, inside book spines. One woman cried because it smelled like the ferry deck where her father scattered her mother's ashes. A teenager said it felt like opening a college acceptance letter. Riley stamped each vial box with a Mercator line that arced upward as though every wearer were a small blue dot heading somewhere kind. The next morning orders exceeded projections by only 4%, just enough to prove desire without summoning hype demons. I found the figure perfect, success tempered by restraint smells like pine after rain. Vogue's write-up landed 2 days later. Instead of recycling scandal headlines, the editor focused on Meridian's quiet confidence and called it a masterclass in post-narrative perfumery, proof that an artist can evolve when given room to breathe. The review ended, Cole's latest release suggests closure is neither bitter nor sweet, it's brackish, alive, horizon-bound. I printed the article on cotton rag using Riley's spare press, folded it into an archival sleeve, and stored it beside bottle 26 in the safe. Not to erase the past, but to mark how far the molecules had traveled. That night Riley and I biked to the East Bank Esplanade. City lights shimmered on the river like loose sequins. She asked what Meridian really meant to me. I told her it was the first scent I'd composed with no need to expose, punish, or prove, only to witness. She slipped her hand into mine, citrus oil faint on her fingertips, and said, "Then witness this. Not every new chapter needs a twist." The river smelled of algae and wet iron. Her hair carried hints of vetiver from leaning over open vats all afternoon. I inhaled deeply, and for once no trace of isobeta 1,4 ghosted the edge of my senses. Scarlett's final email arrived a week later, a brief note saying she'd started a mentorship program for underrepresented travel photographers and hoped we'd both find room to forgive. I stared at the screen, searched my lungs for resentment, and found only a hollow where the ache had lived. Closure, apparently, is a neutral odor, so faint it registers as clean air. I wished her luck, archived the message, and closed the laptop without ceremony. As autumn settled, the loft windows fogged less from rain and more from inside warmth, ink steam, brewing oolong, the low hum of a life newly balanced. Some evenings Riley printed while I diluted tinctures, other nights we let the presses sleep and rode out to Forest Park just to breathe fernetal darkness. Worry no longer smelled like burnt citrus, it didn't smell like anything at all, which to a perfumer is the closest thing to peace. And that, I realized, was the true happily ever after I'd once dismissed as a cliché, not a guarantee of unbroken joy, but the calm certainty that any storm can be mapped, bottled, and left behind. I had traded isobeta 1,4 for birch leaf, infidel for Meridian, and vengeance for the simple grace of forward motion. Each breath tasted of horizons. Each horizon smelled of possibility. People always ask what the studio smells like now, years after the scandal left the tabloids and infidel N²1,4 settled into cult classic status. I tell them it smells like hardwood dust and wet river wind, like ink that has just decided what shape a letter should take. But if they stick around long enough past the obligatory tour, past the wall of awards, past the climate-safe vault where bottle 26 sleeps, they'll catch something softer, barely audible to the nose, a mix of birch leaf, driftwood, and an exhale you can't tell from the breeze. That last note is closure. You can't buy it or bottle it for anyone else, you earn it the slow, ordinary way by staying. Closure didn't arrive in a single triumphant inhale. It seeped in like fog through floorboards, filling the negative spaces betrayal left behind. It coated the memories that used to sting, Scarlett's laugh in Bogota, the coppery chime of Luca's sauté pans, until they became postcards instead of wounds. These days, when I think of Scarlett at all, the image is vignette. She's teaching a class on natural light in some sun-blasted desert, students clustered around her tripod, and the air between us no longer vibrates with isobeta-14 or blame. I wish her good light, good work, and the kind of peace that doesn't need perfume to announce itself. Luca? I heard he resurfaced in Macau under a rebranded surname, pitching molecular bistro theater to high rollers who trade novelty like currency. I keep bottle 26 for reference, the way a sailor keeps a brittle piece of the mast that snapped during the storm, proof the gale was real, proof I didn't imagine the sound of wood and wind screaming in the same key. Some nights interns beg for a whiff. I let them, but only after a lecture. This, I tell them, is what happens when a signature becomes a secret. Keep your signatures public. Secrets will find light, one molecule at a time. What have I learned besides that? 5 things, and if you've followed me this far, you deserve the short list. First, the nose is the original lie detector, but only if the mind is brave enough to translate. Most betrayals announce themselves in microdoses, a shift in timbre and unfamiliar resin on the collar of a shirt. Never gaslight your own senses. If something smells off, write it down, let the data accrue, then decide. Second, revenge is a solvent. Use too much and it melts your container. Use just enough and it cleans the apparatus for whatever comes next. The night of the gala, I dosed the room at 3.2% isobeta-14. Any higher and people would have bolted, any lower and they would have missed the story. Life, it turns out, obeys dilutions too. Third, success that grows from pain still needs pruning. I almost drowned Horizon in orders because I mistook demand for destiny. Naomi's spreadsheets and Riley's quiet questions saved me. Find people who care more about the mission than the moment, they will clip the deadwood before rot spreads. Fourth, smell is memory, but it can also be compass. Meridian taught me that formulas don't have to be autopsies of the past, they can be invitations to the future. If a fragrance points only backward, its dry down will eventually taste like dust. Fifth, and this is the one I tattooed, invisibly, on the inside of my ribs, forgiveness has no aroma because it's the absence of volatile compounds. The moment you notice nothing, no prick of resentment in the lungs, no acidic flicker at the back of the tongue, you've arrived. The air is simply air. Breathe it. Riley and I still run the presses on weekends, limited broadsides scented with testicords, poems etched into cotton paper thick enough to stand as walls between rooms. Sometimes when the rollers hiss and the river windows fog, she'll ask, does happiness smell like anything? My answer shifts. Some days I say warm vinyl on a sunny dashboard. Some days I say the first inhale after thunder. Lately I say it smells like an unopened envelope, possibility, cellulose, the promise of ink. We'll close the shop for the night, bike the esplanade, and the city will smell of yeast from late-shift breweries and wood smoke from food carts packing up. I'll ride behind her, cedar shavings in my hoodie pocket, and think, I don't need happily ever after to smell like roses, I just need it to smell true. So here's my last formula, free of charge. Top note, fresh honesty harvested before sunrise. Heart, empathy distilled slow to avoid bitterness. Base, boundaries aged in quiet for however long it takes. Atomize as needed. Store away from doubt. Share with anyone who's forgotten that every breath is both question and answer. And if someday a faint metallic sweetness slides under your door, don't panic, just open a window. Truth, like fragrance, is meant to circulate. I'll be here on the river when you want to refill, nose up, ready to name the next horizon.